Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Lauren Lefkowitz with Fine as a Trap, a fractional chief HR officer for companies under 100 employees in growth or restructuring phases, and an executive coach. She partners with corporate leaders to support them in overcoming burnout, business, and bad boundary setting. And fun fact, she's also certified laughter yoga instructor offering virtual employee wellness sessions. So welcome, Lauren. It's good to
Thank
see
you, John.
again. You've been on numerous events with us as well for our job seekers, so it's always great to get together. But today we're going to have a bit different of a conversation, getting really into HR. So I think we had discussed a little bit about on the HR side, just, you have these companies that are typically small, medium business, let's say 100 employees, they're scaling quickly. And in the small companies, they usually, I'm assuming they have maybe one HR person and they're bringing you in to support them on issues. What are like a pattern of problems that you typically see in these companies that people can relate to, What are you normally seeing?
I think the most common thing that I see in these companies with around 100 or fewer employees is, do you know the shrug emoji? It's, got its hands out and its shoulders up is sort of that feeling. And so my expertise is around walking into those situations where companies have grown to a certain size. They either haven't needed HR or they've hired like a mid-level or two mid-level HR folks who are not yet at the strategic level, who have been sort of stumbling along because they don't have the HR leadership that they need. And I come in and they say, like, we know this isn't going well from an HR perspective, but we don't know why. And we don't even know what we're supposed to do. In fact, my last corporate job was that way. I walked in and they said, here's your office. We have no idea what your job is. And the cool thing is, great, I do. I know what the job is.
Yeah.
And so I usually start with an overarching evaluation of all of the areas that relate to HR: performance, engagement, recruiting, compliance, employee relations, disciplinary processes, you name it, benefits, compensation, vendors. The biggest issues I usually see are a scattershot approach to anything that involves the people. So recruiting in a haphazard way, not getting back to candidates. If they require in the US OFCCP compliance, there's often a missing piece in connecting those dots and doing what needs to be done. And just a general, most of the companies I work with have really good intentions, and they just don't know what they don't know. And so the first thing I usually tackle is telling them what their compliance issues are and then helping them figure out a strategy to fix them. Because if you just dive in and fix, you haven't thought about the past, if there's reporting you've had to do, if there are people you've had to contact or agencies you've had to contact, and you just go in and fix, you run the risk of, do you have to do a look back and do corrective reporting? And then we look together at what is the employee experience? What is the candidate experience? What are people leaving for? Why are they walking out the door? What is inefficient? What doesn't feel good? And so I usually talk to a few employees who are professional level or entry level, a few employees who are management level, and I just ask about their experience and have like a fairly casual conversation. And I learn a lot about, there tends to be in these smaller companies a real passion for the work. Even if they didn't come to the company because of the mission, because the companies are smaller, the organizations are smaller, people really know each other. And then when they start to get to this 75, 100 people level, they stop knowing each other, especially if they're a remote first environment. So that engagement becomes really important. And working with them to get to know each other, not just through like a trivia night or, a potluck or that kind of thing, but really finding ways to get them to know each other becomes so important. And they just don't know how to do it.
So on the candidate experience side, what would be like typical issues that these smaller businesses are facing? I mean, it seems like they're understaffed on the HR side usually. That's what it sounds like. And they're also maybe the person that they had when they were a 10-person company is still the same person they have at 100-person, and they haven't kind of scaled up the position because they're like, hey, we're happy with whoever it is that's doing it, and we don't want to rock the boat. But at some point, they're like, we do need some strategy. We do need some, some real leadership that, has done the title before, not just growing into it, I guess. You
Right.
need to have the experience, right? So,
Yeah. And you can't grow into your position. If you're an HR professional, you can't grow into a position without somebody helping you develop. And if your leadership is the COO or the CFO and they don't have the HR experience, or the CEO, they're just counting on you to know. And HR people don't typically build outside networks. We work in these like confidential, isolated cases, and we think, and I thought this in my corporate days, we think we just sort of have to be insular and not reach out. What I have learned, and what I learned really late in my corporate career, is that you need each other. And there are so many ways to build networks. There are a couple of organizations that do free webinars or free live streams. This is a great example, right? Of, I'm now on your podcast, I'm doing a webinar with you, I've done a webinar with you before. Like, those audiences are your people because they're engaged in the HR world, and you can do cross mentorship. You can ask each other questions. You can find support in your industry. You can figure out what you want to do next by getting to know people in other industries. When you are this sort of mid-level HR person, and you've been hired as mid-level because the company wasn't ready for the executive level, and they don't really know what they're hiring for, you get trapped in this place where you're just trying to like keep your nose above water so that you can do a little bit of breathing, but you're barely treading at that point. And so when we talk about the candidate experience, which is really the first stage in employee engagement, if I apply for a job and then that whole process is awful, I'm going to have opinions about the company. I'm going to worry that it's going to be like that when I come in. And it's not necessarily going to be. But if the candidate experience is, I apply for a job, I don't hear anything for 3 months because the HR person is so bogged down, or I don't hear anything for 3 months because HR keeps sending resumes to the hiring manager, but there isn't good communication between the hiring manager and HR. And so HR's, doing this shrug emoji and saying like, I can't get so-and-so to get back to me, so I can't move forward with candidates because we haven't built those processes. We haven't gained that agreement. We haven't built those relationships in that way for accountability purposes. And so if the candidate experience is good, I apply for a job, the application is fairly short. I'm not repeating information that's on my resume. I'm not answering inane questions that nobody's going to look at, essay questions, etc., that nobody's going to look at. And then within a week or two, I get a call or an email to schedule a phone screen. And then we move forward the next week or two to a second round and maybe a third round if we need it, and stop there, right? Because any more rounds than that, there's this like air of indecision of like, we have to do everything collectively. And if that's the case, then internally there probably are a bunch of bottlenecks, right? And so getting that candidate experience to be great, keeping in touch with your final candidates as you're moving forward, having a nice, welcoming offer letter, and not like, the details of your employment are as such. We're an at-will employer, right? Like, you do have to say you're an at-will employer if you're an at-will state in the US. And also, you don't have to be like so cold that you get a chill when you see your offer information. And same with the onboarding. You want it warm and welcoming and friendly. And a lot of mid-level HR people haven't experienced that. They've either been in environments where that was already built, and so it's overwhelming to think of building it from the beginning, or they haven't been in environments where it was already built. So they're bringing bad habits with them to their new company. And so they need that strategic level HR. And I do not move into a company. I don't bring my U-Haul and, expect to stay for years and years. My goal when I come in as a fractional chief HR officer is to up level everybody and everything, to help them build systems and processes and agreements so that when a resume comes in and the HR person sends it to the hiring manager, there's an agreement that in 2 days or 3 days, the HR manager will, or the hiring manager will respond to the HR person. And then the process moves forward. And every process should be closed in 3 to 4 weeks tops. And if you have those systems in place, if you're able to work with those systems and get the cultural insights from the HR person who's there, because they will know more than me, then you can build what's going to work for everybody. You can help gain those agreements, help up level the current HR person, teach them how to find networks. And when you walk out of a company, you're not leaving them with, what you see in a lot of large consulting firms is like, here's your 90-page report with instructions on what to do. Enjoy having it collect dust on your desk because you're too busy to actually do any of the things. So I, as a chief HR officer, I am a doer and I'm a strategist. And so we don't have me doing the really entry level work, but we do have me calling vendors and saying, you're not providing good service. This is not how this should work. We need access to X, Y, and Z, which again, the mid-level HR person who hasn't had this development doesn't know they can fight back to vendors, doesn't know that they can add ancillary benefits through a broker because their broker isn't doing what their broker should be doing. And so for me, it's such a fun job to be able to come in and sort of shine light on what's possible. And yeah, you kind of have to start with what's wrong, right? Coaching works the same way. You have to start with what's wrong, but to help them elevate and to help them feel like they can become and be in a place where instead of sort of haphazardly putting Band-Aids and bubble gum on all of the problems, they're actually pre-solving. They're being proactive.
That's a thoughtful response, and I mean, it makes sense because I've seen that not only on HR side, but it seems like in a lot of companies where they have a junior person that has been, not, I wouldn't say promoted, but that has grown with the business. This happens in marketing, sales, you name it. At a certain point, the person you have leading the function, whether it's sales, marketing, or HR, whatever it is, they hit their, I call it their threshold of like, it's too much for them to handle based on their experience level or their skill set, right? So if you're there you're the number 5 employee, you're now at 50 and you're like, okay, now it's getting a lot to handle. I'm not equipped. I don't have the experience, right? They probably were paying you a lower salary. You were probably a junior person that now you're called a director, right? Because they want to give you a title. They respect your loyalty to the company. They want to take care of you, but at the same time, like, you're also not there. This is where we see this, where the company will ask for fractional leadership. We've seen that many times. They say, well, we need some help with strategy for marketing, for sales, for HR. And then at some point they come to us, and I've seen this on the search side. We actually do need a real director, right? And that's not, no shade on the person that was there. They did their best. They're good employees. They work hard. We can keep them, but we actually need a real director. And so then we'll find their first director, which again is coming in, that has a very small team. It'll be like the one person and then someone else. And the person, if they're able to be trainable, coachable, then it'll be a great relationship where they're like, oh, I want to learn, bring someone in to help me learn. If they have a big ego, they're going to not like that. And then you're going to have to probably remove them because they're going to be, well, why didn't I get the VP spot? I've been here since day one. And I get that, but you don't have the skill set for a VP. We'll actually get a VP that's done it for 5 years and with bigger companies and has the skill set. And so we've seen that scenario play out tons.
Yeah.
So I totally see what you're coming from with that.
There's a lot of fear as companies are expanding of offending each other.
Yeah.
So you have a mid-level HR person, you're ready for a VP. The mid-level HR is not ready to be a VP. But that mid-level person reports to the CEO. And the CEO does not want to offend the mid-level person and make them feel like they've gotten demoted by having an in-between. And now the CEO is their skip level. And there are ways to work that, still having skip level meetings, not maybe as frequently, but still having skip level meetings. So you're still in contact with that level above. Hiring someone who is really well equipped to develop the HR person so that they see it as a development and growth opportunity, not a demotion. And I recently was working with a company that was sort of in this situation. They had let their director go. They needed a VP, and they had a team of 3, which was a fairly big team, but they are growing. And I came in with a development attitude, and I helped the HR folks learn more and figure out what their resources are and figure out what to attend and how to connect with people in the chats and all of that kind of stuff. And the HR manager said to me as I was leaving, "I've learned more from you in 3 months than I've learned my whole career." And so I came in as this scary fractional HR consultant. And within 2 weeks, they were all like, "Tell me more. What else do you know?" Right. And that's a great feeling for me. I mean, it's really satisfying for me that I have that skill set. And also then it made it easier for them to have a VP come in because they realized this wasn't putting up a new barrier, that this was really their opportunity to develop. And so that's a really important factor. And if you're not going to have an HR person internally, that's where coaching comes in, right? If you're not going to have a strategic level HR person, then you can create sort of a coach-sultant relationship where I do some HR development and some professional and personal development and some like pure coaching. And that's a lower cost way on a monthly basis to get development for your HR person without necessarily being at the point where you need that full strategic HR.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. But I guess that also creates the idea of like, one is your approach, how you're coming in, as a fractional for sure, having those soft skills to be able to mitigate, bad feelings or, well, why are you here? I'm the head of HR. And, but I think when they realize the value and they see the coaching and then maybe they're going to take it in a better way. But how do you do that when you like, I think one of the biggest issues we see in a small business too is like the lack of boundary setting, just everything just keeps going the way it is, and they've grown and they maybe haven't set the proper boundaries around their work either, because it's like everyone's so committed. When you're a small company, everyone does what they need to do, right? Everyone wears many hats, but at some point it becomes more specialized the bigger the organization, right? Then you start to have your specialization, not just you're in everything. And CEOs have a hard time with this. I've seen many where they start to scale their leadership team. I saw this recently. We hired a COO for a company, and the CEO didn't want to let go of the reins. They're like, "Oh, I got to be in everything." And so setting those boundaries with your job, your responsibility, your accountability, like how do you work that in these smaller companies where it could be a family business too. That's usually you see that, right? Or owner operator. There's there a lot of entrenched interests in the company, and
Yeah.
possibly nepotism too, and with some of the hires for sure.
Oh,
Right?
yeah, absolutely. I think, in a startup environment in particular, we're hiring our friends, and our friends tend to look like us. And in a lot of cases, we end up with a very white, young male staff. And then we start to hire a little bit of diversity. And there's this fear of letting go, not just because this is what you've been doing, you've been handling everything as the leader, but also because you've been working with your friends this whole time. Now you're hiring strangers and you have to let go and trust the stranger. So one of the important pieces is the job description and really understanding as the leader what you are letting go of in this job description. So if you've been a COO and you've been managing HR and now it's time to hire an HR person, when you write that job description, there's an art and science to it. The science is, what's the job description of an HR person? Let's pull a few of those. What are the bullet points that resonate? How does that then come into your job description for what you need? And are you willing to let this work go? when this person comes in? What accountability do you need? What trust but verify bits and pieces do you need in order to trust that the person you're hiring is going to do the job and you can let go? Sometimes it's like you flip the switch and they're like, here's all the work. Other times it's the way you've said, is like, I don't want to let go of it. And the HR person is sort of twiddling their thumbs when they should be very busy. And so if the CEO or the COO or whoever is hiring the level of person that's part of expansion isn't willing to let go, then don't hire. Then bring in a consultant and start handing things off project by project or process by process so that you start to get a little bit comfortable with letting go. Where I see this being the biggest challenge is when they have hired strangers and it's been the wrong hire. And so then they didn't really trust before, and now they don't trust even more. They want to hold everything close to their hearts because they're afraid that this baby that they've developed is going to be destroyed. And I think, what I've seen as the biggest set of challenges in a smaller company is letting go of the things that already aren't working. So where I see the most success in companies is when they bring in a fractional CHRO and a fractional chief revenue officer. Those are sort of baseline: compliance, employee experience, performance, engagement on the HR side. And then on the revenue side is like, how do we do it, right? Because you can hire a chief marketing officer, but if your chief marketing officer doesn't understand the revenue strategy, or if there isn't a revenue strategy, or if there isn't an identified ideal customer base, then what are you marketing, right? Like, who are you marketing to? So bringing in a CRO, chief revenue officer, and a chief HR officer, again, not forever. That's the beauty of fractional, right? It can be not forever, or it can be forever on a very small scale, right? If you need just like general advisory services on occasion. But if you can bring in those two positions, both of those can help you decipher what goes where. And how do we make sure we don't have like the one guy who does everything? Go to Joe. He knows everything, right? Joe needs to learn to let go of all of the things so that if Joe is the CFO, he can really focus on high quality finance and accounting. He can focus on making sure that they're a compliant company from a financial perspective, that they're doing audits, that they're closing books. I have walked into organizations where everything is guesswork. They just spend what they need to spend. And then at the end of the year, they tie down and they're like, we made some money this year, right? We knew we did because the checking account still had money in it, right?
Terrible.
It's awful. And it's so common with companies that you're wowed by in their products and services. And behind the scenes, like I said, it's all Band-Aids and bubble gum holding everything together. So if you can get that organized on the revenue side, they can help decipher like what is sales, what is marketing, and what do you need in order to be successful on those sides. When you bring in a chief HR officer, they can help with who's doing what and why is this job 6 jobs in one, and how many hours are people working and what are they doing, and sort of doing an analysis of what do you need to start doing that feels like a hole, who can do that internally and has the space for it, and if not, who do you need to hire? Is it a contract? Is it an agency? Is it a full-time or part-time person? And then you can look at, how do we put boundaries around this? I have been in my corporate life, I'm a former workaholic, a recovering people pleaser, and I've been a classic hand raiser. And I think a lot of HR people in particular are that. We are good at work. And so if nobody else raises their hand and the CEO is saying, who's going to wake up every morning thinking about this? The HR person goes, I guess I will. And that leads you to, in my case, having been the interim VP of marketing, interim VP of fundraising, interim VP of programs, interim VP of finance, while I was the VP of HR. And it was all really interesting experience. It taught me really full scope business in a way that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and also fully burned me out. And so as an HR person in particular, which often comes across as a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades kind of role, being willing to sit with the silence when the CEO says, who's gonna manage marketing while we're looking for a new marketing person? Who HR person are already looking for the new marketing person? You've already taken on a responsibility. If you have to, you sit on your hands so your hand
Yeah.
doesn't go up. And so boundary setting, whether in big ways or little ways, is so important. And I can remember from, that time in my life where I was taking on all of these extra roles. When I started boundary setting, it wasn't like, it's all over for you suckers, right? I'm out. It was redirecting people on small things. It was not checking my phone until 8 a.m. because I used to wake up in the morning and the first thing I would look at is my phone to see like what emergencies were on the horizon. But it's small things. You can't, as a human, you can't just all of a sudden change all of your behavior. And so whether you're in the CEO or CFO or COO role or HR or whatever it is, if you are bogged down and you are deep in burnout and you don't have good boundaries and you answer your phone at 10 o'clock at night and you're checking your email until you fall asleep and as soon as you wake up, you don't just 9 to 5 yourself all of a sudden. It's a practice, it's a building. And that's where the coaching side comes in really, is the workaholics I know are really good at supporting other people, at solutions-oriented work, at telling other people and teaching other people how to set boundaries. And then we turn around and look at ourselves and we're like, well, it's not available for me. So we need a coach or a mentor or a boss who will say to us, what do you actually need? And help us discover what that is. Go after it in small steps so that it's a sustainable change and not just, well, I did a great job this week setting boundaries. Back to it next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also if the boss is used to you always raising your hand, then it becomes almost an expectation. And then when you don't, it's like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? Right? Like it's like, well, you're emerging from burnout. I think we had talked about that during COVID, right? Just the amount of burnout in HR. I saw this in the healthcare side, like anyone in HR healthcare was,
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
it was something else, right?
Yeah.
And even for myself, during COVID, I was in an operations management role with a large team, and half my job was being a counselor to them because of their fears about anxieties and fears about the disease and everything else, and people having to literally quit their jobs because they didn't have childcare because now the schools were closed. So they had there was quite a few women on my team had to leave their job entirely to stay home with their kids to homeschool, which was terrible. But like all of that you're dealing with. And then after COVID, we're emerging. We're like, okay, now they want us all back into office. And that's a whole other discussion. We don't need to get into the return to office thing, but people are trying to recover from a major burnout. What advice do you give to HR people out there that are like, I'm just cooked here. Like I'm just well done. I'm well done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, first of all, breathing. We don't breathe. I mean, we do because our bodies make us do that automatically so we don't die. But we breathe in this like really shallow way when we're stressed out, and literally taking just 1 minute to sit quietly and breathe. You can set a timer so you're not like peeking out of one eye to see how long you've been breathing for. But there are a couple of breathwork techniques that I really like, especially for people who like counting. I love counting. But there's box breathing where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds. And you just repeat that for a minute. It's amazing how much that can change your energy from very stressed to a tiny bit less stressed. It's not a fix. It's a part, it's a part of it. So I truly think I've worked with clients where I've said, like, what kind of breaks do you take during the day? And they've said, oh, I sit in my chair shaking my leg until I can't avoid it anymore. And then I run to the bathroom and then I'm back. And so for those clients, it's been that they've set an alarm on their phone. They've walked to the window and they've breathed for a minute and then they come back. And what that does for you is it leaves you wanting more of that, because it does feel so good and it's just such a short time. So I think, the start to emerging from burnout is noticing what is happening, noticing that you're not taking breaks, noticing that you're forcing yourself not to go to the restroom because you're like right in the middle of something, that you always say yes to the "do you have 5 minutes" question, which in HR, never 5 minutes. A 5-minute conversation in HR is usually an hour and 10 minutes until somebody has a next meeting. So setting boundaries around that, redirecting people. If something comes to you and you know how to do it, but it's not actually your job, not taking that on. And you will get pushback on that. And I remember one of the first boundaries that I set myself, somebody came to me and said, "Hey, can you do X, Y, and Z?" I said, "Oh, that's actually Bill's job. If you go to him, I'm sure he'll help you." And then I sat at my computer just staring and waiting for the email to come back, berating me. And it did. And the email was, "You've done this for me before. Isn't this part of your job?" And it didn't have a tone because email never does. But in my brain, it was like, "Isn't that your job? Lazy," right? Because we have these opinions about ourselves. And I breathed for a second and I said, "I know I've done it for you before, but it's actually not part of what I do. And this person, it's part of their job. And so I'm sure if you go to him, he'll help you with it." And the email I got back was, "Cool, thanks." So it really was just out of curiosity, "Isn't this yours?" "No,
Yeah,
it's not." "Okie dokie." And
you build it up in your head though, right? Like
yes, we have
it's
so
almost like
much
we're our
fear.
own worst enemies with that stuff, right? Like you're creating this anxiety trap around you of like you feel like people are going to reject you or they're going to be upset with you, or if you're not, the perfect robot person at work. And it's like sometimes we're all human, and you'd be surprised how like saying no is very powerful. I know that's been a very hard thing if you're a people pleaser to deal with, like or accept for yourself almost.
Yeah.
So
And
I get that.
saying no is not only powerful, the way you say no can be really powerful. So if you say, "No, I can't do that. I'm really bogged down this week," you're opening the door for that person to say, "Oh, okay, you'll do it next week." When you learn how to set boundaries and you learn the language to use, no can be a complete sentence. But no, that's not part of my scope of work. No, I can't make that a priority, but check with this person. No, I've never even heard of that, right? HR folks are the kings and queens of, maybe I'm supposed to know that. I'll go figure it out.
Yes, totally get that. So, we talked about that mid-level person that's, the fractional comes in or they're not ready for the big seat, let's say. What would you recommend for like professional development for these people? Like they're like, "Hey, I'm in that situation myself right now. I'm in a 100-person company. What do I do?" What would you say for professional development? Like, in terms of not only their career, but like courses, things like that. Like, how do they prepare for that VP seat if they don't have a mentor?
Great question. Getting a mentor is a great step,
Well,
right?
how do you go about that?
Yeah.
Assume the person's like clueless about all this, right?
Absolutely. So there are a number of things you can do. One is that a lot of the HR organizations have chats or boards that you can, ask questions on and have conversations on. If you go to a webinar or a live stream on LinkedIn, pay attention to the chat, because the people who are in the chat have learned a little bit how to network. And those can be your people. So let's say you go to a webinar on the topic of finding your next job. And in the chat, you see other people who have HR in their headline. Connect to them and say like, "Hey, I'm trying to build my HR network." That's it. You don't have to do a whole story about why you think you're a good match to be connected on LinkedIn. Just a quick connect. And if you connect with 5 or 10 or 15 people a month, you'll start to see like who you might be interested in building more of a relationship with. Then you can ask for a networking call. And at that point, if you're starting to look upward, if you're an HR manager and you're only connecting with other HR managers, you're only going to see yourself in. So if you're an HR manager and you're connecting with directors and VPs and SVPs and EVPs and chiefs, you're going to be building at least an online network where you see people who are doing things that are your next level goal. Reaching out to anybody and asking them for 15 minutes, totally not a big deal. I will almost always say yes to that unless I know it's actually a sales pitch. Then I say no. And you can tell. You can
A lot
tell.
of sneaky sales pitches out there for sure.
Yeah. So that's a way to start building relationships. In terms of learning and up-leveling, HR conferences are great. Getting a coach, getting an executive coach who understands HR is an opportunity. I think that getting a coach who has HR experience is important specifically for HR people. It's not necessary for everyone. It's a bonus if you're job hunting at the same time that you're getting an executive coach. Absolutely. And, getting a coach who has full scope business experience, I think also is like really good for corporate people. But their SHRM has like an internal chat system. Hacking HR, which is an organization I work with that I moderate panels for every month. They don't have an internal chat, but they do have a website that you can sign up for free. You don't get credits unless you're paying for the membership, but you can watch every panel that's ever been done. And they do 15 or so panels a month on different topics. You can learn a lot from the HR leaders who are on the panels of those discussions. And just reading, subscribe to Harvard Business Reviews. Do a Google alert for whatever areas of HR you're particularly interested in. If you're looking to up-level, ask your benefits broker if they know anybody who they really like, who they think is really good at HR that you could network with. There are tons of different ways to find your people. That first step of saying, can I have a call with you, is really scary. If you have the courage and you do 10 of those, it's no longer scary.
Makes sense. And I think it's like there's so many resources now. And there's so many of these small groups. One of the things I've discovered recently is like Slack groups for HR. There's tons of these Slack groups that are completely free as well.
Yeah.
So finding those groups and joining them and then asking questions and just, leveling up with the people around you. So yeah, I think if you're not a networker, if you're an introvert, it can be a bit scary, as you said, initially to get out there, but the more you do it, it's like you conquer your fear, right? It takes time and repetition of, reaching out. And what I found too, most people on LinkedIn, if you're asking for a coffee chat, they're pretty open to it. If they're, don't ask them maybe during Q4 when they're doing, their comp and ben analysis or whatever, but things like that. But in the doldrums of January, maybe it's a little bit easier, or after the holidays, you can get some time, on the calendar and have a little chat. So that makes sense. How are you feeling now about, I think there was a big controversy this year with SHRM dropping the E and D, E and I, and so on. Some people have boycotted SHRM. Other people are just like, whatever. There's obviously another avenue would also be going after your PHR, let's say, as another. Is there any other accreditations or training like you could recommend, like in terms of like credentials?
Yeah. I was smirking while you were saying SHRM. I am not a fan of SHRM. I think their CEO is very self-interested. And for me, the wrong side of politics. I think taking the E out of DEI is atrocious. And you see all around the US that a lot of companies have taken DEI out and they're sort of talking in a whitewashed way about their diversity practices or their inclusion or their welcoming everyone kinds of practices. So it's a hard time right now to talk about DEI for a lot of companies because some of them rely on federal funding. Some of them rely on, if they're a nonprofit, they rely on donors of all political backgrounds. And if they're a government agency, forget about it. They can't talk about anything. I think it's a disservice to the HR community. I think it's a disservice to how the OFCCP runs, which if you're not familiar with that, if you have federal contracts of $50,000 or more, or a certain number of employees, which I can't remember off the top of my head, I think it's 100, you're required to comply to the Office of Federal Contracts. And we don't know if they're going to uphold the DEI stuff that goes with the OFCCP. And when the largest HR organization in the world says DE is not important, how are we as HR people supposed to defend that? So I have divested from SHRM. I have kept my SHRM SCP certification just because I educate myself anyway. I'm getting the credits anyway, but I don't hold a lot to that. Unfortunately, SHRM has the best internal chat system for the big organizations. As you said, there are smaller organizations, there are Slack channels, etc. I do really like HRCI. I've always found them to be ethical. I was around back in the day when SHRM literally put HRCI's furniture on the grass and said, we're no longer partnered. I love the HRCI webinars. I think they're really high quality. The chats are super active. I also really like the hacking HR. I'm a little bit biased because I'm in there moderating panels. Again, I think they're very high quality. They attract really strong panelists globally. And all of their stuff is credit bearing if you're a member. So I think it's about sort of testing the waters and seeing what you enjoy, what conversations you're enjoying, etc.
Yeah, I guess the concern with all of that is because there's so many different credentialing kind of organizations, and there's also it's become a political football in many cases now. Unfortunately, everything's become political, right? And not to get into the politics of it, but it's for me, I like standards. I like to see standards. So it's
Yeah.
like if the standards are different with SHRM than with hacking HR or PHR and so on, then how do we come to an agreement of what good HR looks like if we kind of look at it from different perspectives, or there's
Yeah.
different, so that's my concern of diminishing the whole of HR as a function if we're arguing about what's the way forward with certain things, right? For example, in engineering, there's professional engineering designation, and it is what it is, and it's very strict how you do things. Same with accounting. You have generally accepted accounting principles, the gap they call it, right?
Right.
So I guess that's where with HR now, it seems like there's almost a rift building in the different orgs with some of because it's political now.
Yeah.
And
What I see there is that
how do you navigate that?
SPHR and SHRM SCP and PHR and SHRM CP are the most recognized in US and Canada. Overseas, there are different credentialing systems. There is also, I think it's World at Work does benefits and compensation credentialing. And those for me are the most recognizable. There are a lot of certificate programs. Hacking HR doesn't have certifications. They do have a couple of certificate programs, which I haven't attended, but the quality of what they do makes me think that they're good. So those are good ways to sort of, in a small scale, learn a specific avenue of HR. But on job descriptions, on job postings, what I see most frequently is the SHRM and the HRCI credentials as being the only ones recognized. And that's really only because hiring managers who don't have HR are Googling what HR credentials should I look for? And AI is saying that those are the most recognized.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So I think, I think it's important to get yourself educated, keep yourself current, and to have a certification. I prefer the HRCI, which is the PHR, SPHR. There's global SPHR and PHR because I think it's recognizable, and HRCI is not controversial. They haven't gotten into politics. They are there to support HR people. And so I think the companies they partner with tend to be ethical for webinars and such. And I think their credentials, to me, just one woman's opinion, are the most solid.
that makes sense. And I mean, that's the thing, right? It's you want something straightforward enough where there can be at least some kind of agreement on where the policies should be, right? And so I
Yeah.
guess that's the issue with some of the stuff that's happened lately. It's like you don't know if this is going to be transitory politics or if it's going to change or whatnot, but like you want some stability in how we conduct ourselves in business, right? There's got to be some level of, okay, well, set standards, accountabilities, and so on. Because if it changes every political cycle, right, like whoever wins, then it can be a little bit difficult for people to to have like set policies and so on if we're changing all the time. So I'm hoping this will all sort out with time, and we'll see how it goes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I also think Agile Six Sigma has really come into play in a lot of companies. And so if that is something that's interesting as an HR person, it's a good set of certifications to go after. It would be in addition to and separate from your HR credentialing, because that is always the first and foremost. But if you come into an organization of 100 people or fewer and you're able to teach them how to work in an agile way, in cross-functional ways, in a matrixed environment, in co-accountability, you really are offering more than your typical HR person.
That's some good advice. So we'll get everyone, signing up for some webinars and learning. And I mean, there's so many resources available, right? So I'm hoping I'll take something away from today's chat.
Yeah, I hope so.
Want to thank you for that, and we'll call it a day here.
Thanks so much, Sean.